Hello and welcome to Rolling with Two. I'm Will, and with me as always is the six-sided space cadet herself,
Sarah.
And today we're doing a two-player perspective and accessibility for Alien Frontiers. Now this is the core game. They did come out with an Edition X, which actually just has everything, but we're gonna break all that down. So we're just gonna start, because our copy's the 4th edition, right?
Correct.
All right. Tell us a bit about this game.
All right. So Alien Frontiers is a game of resource management, area control, and planetary development. During the game, you will utilize orbital facilities and alien technology to build colony domes in strategic locations to control the newly discovered world. The end game is triggered by the player who puts out all of their colonies first, and the winner is whoever has the most points. All right, well, so how does the game change for 2 players?
So for 2 players, you have a number of overlays that just sit on the board to essentially cover up spots, because it's more restricted that way. There is no bot, so no nanas are needed for playing this game.
You also colonies.
And the number of
You're getting to it.
Getting to it. And the number of colonies used are more than a more player game. So normally, like a 4-player game, I believe it's like 6 colonies.
Yes.
But for a 2-player game, it's 8 in order to fill up what is essentially the area control portion of the board. There are certain areas that receive the bubble dome cities, and whoever has the most has control of that and gets a special power.
Correct.
So
issues at a 2-player kind of lead to around having more colonies. The game can go on really long. And again, it's their attempt at making the area control work for 2 players, which is why most area control games are 3 or more players.
Yeah, it was silly for them to eliminate abilities that are on the board. So they kept all the abilities, but they're like, okay, we have a lot more space that needs to be filled up.
Yes.
And the only solution they had was, well, just give the lesser player counts more bubble to fill in.
Right. Exactly. Okay, so, but what it does well then on the flip side of that is you can actually get further ahead by not competing, at least early on in the game, because as he alluded to, each of the regions has an ability. So if you control that area, you get that ability. So very early on in a 2-player game, if you're going to put out a colony, it's generally not in your best interest to compete with the other player, because at best, you're denying them an ability and lowering their points. But if there's areas on the map that have not been filled in, you're better off going and claiming it, because 1 token, if you're the only one there, it's yours. You get more points and you get the special ability, and it's yours until the other player expands in that area.
Yeah, because points are interesting in the fact that you get 1 point for having a colony out. You get another point if you have that region's ability.
Right.
And the ability only goes to whoever has the most. So with the lack of competition, more points, more abilities, yes please, before it even comes into, do I need to even bother competing?
Right. I mean, there's very few circumstances where it is better to remove an ability from the other player. It does happen. It's just generally in the middle part of the game to the end of the game is when you're going to start trying to do that.
Yeah.
At the 2-player count.
Yes.
All right. That's about it for the 2-player experience. So moving on for accessibility. So there might be some colorblind accessibility with the player components. You have dice, colonies, and a rocket in each player color. They are the kind of, what do you call them, standard.
Yeah, your red, your greens, your blues, your yellows.
And they're bright. Well, they're bold, I would say. I wouldn't say they're bright. They're bold colors, which is nice in that they pop off the board. But when it comes to being able to tell them apart from each other, you're going to need to see whichever set works best for you. And if you're having trouble distinguishing them, the easy part with the D6 is they're basic. So you can just replace them with anything you want. Colony markers, again, you could replace them with something else. It's just whether you have a sci-fi thematic components that you could change it to, because you only need 8. And then a rocket, I hate to put it this way. You could substitute pieces It's not fun. It's not necessarily easy, but you could if none of these colors work for you.
Yeah, and the expansions do introduce orange and purple.
Yeah.
Which is worth mentioning here because the most accessible version of this game is probably going to be the Edition X. That has everything, so you will have actually more options
Right.
color-wise. And a lot of times what happens is you just find the color that does work for you.
Right. And make sure no one else is playing a color that can be mixed up with
Yeah.
your color.
I would say like blue is an accessibility color for you because
Yes.
if someone else is playing blue, you're just going to move their
Yeah,
pieces.
that's just a cognitive issue. If someone else is blue, I'm moving it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
More points for me.
Right. The only other challenge we really saw is that, at least initially, but also if you don't play the game too often, learning what each of the worker placement spots does and the requirements you need to take that spot can be a little hard to learn and hard to remember sometimes because they're very specific on you need a set of dice that add up to 8, or you need sequential numbers, or all of the same, and every spot is going to be different.
Yeah. And when we say hard, it's probably for someone who's not a very experienced
True.
Player. They're like, you do what again? And you're just going to have the entire game. Then, okay, I want to do this. And they just completely have forgotten what's the
Yes.
requirement. And they're wondering why it's so hard. And it's a bad experience for everybody.
Right.
But if you have a few games underneath your belt, I would definitely recommend having some games of Yahtzee underneath your belt. That would
That's
probably
true.
help
That's true.
get people in the right mindset as to what type of things they're expecting.
Yeah.
That will really help.
Yep. All right. So what it does right, though, is all the icons are unique and distinct. The iconography is simple and straightforward. So the learning curve is really just the learning curve. After that, everything is pretty straightforward. You're not generally going to get anything mixed up with anything else. And as we talked about earlier, the points are really simple. And the reason why I bring this up as a good accessibility feature is some people get a little overwhelmed when there's a lot of math to the game.
Yeah.
The scoreboard in this game only goes up to 14. Now, we have played games at the 2-player count where we can kind of go off that board. I think for the most part, if you're playing 3 or 4, you're not going to get that many points.
Well, the other reason why we went off the board is one of the expansions introduces agendas, which are
That's true.
Another avenue for more points.
But I think even in one of the base games we played, you went 1 point off the board. But I may be misremembering. I thought you got to 15. But I didn't look at the scores.
It's much harder in the base game.
It is much harder, but it's easier at a 2-player count
Yes.
to do it,
Since
to
you
get
have-
off the board.
Oh yeah, it is possible because you have 8 colonies. Yeah, that's 8 points in and of themselves, plus extra talent or skill from each region gives an
Yeah.
extra point.
Controlling
yeah.
the region. Yeah, it is possible.
Yeah.
The other thing that's great is on the back of the rule book, there's a quick rules and reference guide. So if you're having any issues, you can reference that pretty easily because it's there. All right. Conclusion?
For 2 players, would you recommend?
I say mostly yes. Just know that you're in for a longer game. And the only reason I think that might be an issue for some is that it feels like it kind of drags just because you're doing a lot of the same things. The gameplay loop doesn't necessarily support a longer game.
Yeah, I found the gameplay mechanics that you do is nice, simple, and you can really get into the groove. But like you said, once you get past that 6th colony, you're like,
Why isn't the game over yet?
why isn't it over yet? Because that's where it feels like it should be over,
Right.
and which is why it is over in a 4-player
Right.
game, not so much in a 2-player. So yeah, just prepare yourself for that little extra time.
Unless, of course, you want to play with just 6 colonies. I don't think it would break things too much, other than it would be even less area control competition.
Right, which you wouldn't mind.
I wouldn't mind.
All right, accessibility.
Mostly, yes. I think the only concern I have would be for any colorblind accessibility for the components. The good news is the components are relatively simple and straightforward, so I do believe they'd be relatively easy to substitute if you can't find one of the colors that works for you.
Yeah, agreed. The everything is also open information.
Yes.
You don't actually get to closed information until you get to agendas in one of the expansions.
True, because
So-
even the tech cards are open information.
because you'll get them. They just go right in front of
Yeah.
you. Everybody knows you have them.
Right.
Because they can be stolen. But the base game has everything that's just open information, so that also helps tremendously with the accessibility.
Agreed.
All right, and Sarah, one of the
Yes.
big differences between this and Edition X is Edition X doesn't feature rocket dice. That was a little gimmick thrown in here early on. Mm-hmm. So for you, is it about the rocket dice or about traditional dice?
I would say, if anything, the reason to get Edition X is for the upgraded bits, because all we've got are cubes and discs.
Yeah.
Dice are dice. I mean, we didn't get the rocket dice because we're not a huge fan of them. They are a bit gimmicky and they roll a little weird. So I think in that respect, I do prefer traditional dice. But I prefer shiny little bits and bobs.
Yeah, you're like, forget the dice. Just give me the meeple stuffs.
Yes, exactly.
All right. And and why would you ever roll with just one when you can be rolling with two? And remember, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can reach out to us on the various social media platforms at
Rolling with Two, that's TWO. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And on YouTube, please like and subscribe.
And if you have time, check out the other content Nanaman has found for you, because remember, he's rolling with you.